Good morning, Tubaneros. So, I recently stayed at a hotel. No, it wasn't a Holiday Inn Express, so I can't blame this video on my choice there. But I had problems with the digital TV, and so I called room service. The maintenance guy they sent up had a real Zomgits of an accent, so I inquired where he was from. Well, that turned out to be Albania, where he has a young wife and child to whom he sends money. But he was originally from Kosovo, or Kosova, I guess I should now say, and he went on to describe his life there as a kid during the nasty times. When I mentioned Kosovo, or as the site of Camp Bondsteel, one of the largest US/NATO bases in the world, his eyes lit up. Our family couldn't have made a living without Bondsteel, he said. America was our big daddy. When he asked how I knew about all this, I replied that it's public information. He laughed at that as if it was so absurd that he should have seen it himself as well. Grateful immigrants like this young man underscore the American mythology of itself as a guiding hand of benevolence, bringing freedom, security, and opportunity to the lesser folk of the planet. Never mind that Bondsteel epitomizes the brutal bombing war in Kosovo that helped destabilize the local society and destroy its internal economic development for some time yet to come. That it was made economically dependent on outside imperial structures, which is why he had to leave his homeland and how he could get through the bureaucratic hoops to live in the metropole itself. And that this whole process and result is just a mockery of the professed goals of humanitarian intervention, of nation building and economic self-determination, which was trotted out as justification. When I hear these rationalizations, I laugh just as he did over the absurdity of the obvious. Not of their factuality, but how they expressly contradict the reality of boots-on-the-ground empire. Every time you hear a U.S. Secretary of State mouth the usual platitudes of nation-building, and it doesn't matter which political party they belong to, or if it's Hillary Clinton, or Madeleine Albright, or Condoleezza Rice, be sure that another exercise in imperial muscle-flexing is in store, that the desire to bully and beat a target into submission for the basest ego gratification is again to be rationalized with the highest of moral purpose, and to be done for the good of those being beaten, and for the uplift of the human spirit in general. And those secretaries were all women. Wonder what they'd do if any of them became the real chief of state behind Big Daddy's desk. Anyway, all imperial powers glory in their own self-benevolence, but of course the fact is that these emperors never have any clothes and always stand brutally naked when they appear before others who don't have to lie to them for job security. The U.S. passion for nation building and economic development will always stand exposed likewise as nonsense, thanks to the Vietnam War. Try as it has for nearly a half-century, this ghost will not fade quietly into the ether of the past. It still knocks at the door of all imperial pretensions in the modern world, and perhaps more so in the sweeping inhumanity of World War II, which seems so extreme as to make its lessons almost mythical. Vietnam is more accessible, because it's more human in its scope, because it's us. The legacy of the mass bombing of North Vietnam, the napalming of South Vietnam, the mass violence inflicted on its population in the name of counterinsurgency, the rationalization of the devastation and bitterness as collateral damage, will forever devaluate the hard currency of empire pushed at the world. Blood money circulates as freely as any other, you say. Just think of all the stuff you can buy with it, like the money you get from pushing crack. As for the social, economic, and spiritual destruction you leave behind, hey, it's a tough world. It's them or us. That is the reality behind the ego-aggrandizement of American empire. Vietnam was its honest expression, and it won't ever wash clean. American policymakers will never grasp this because they're sunk into their own self-serving mythology. They really believe there's a difference between what they are doing in Afghanistan and the Soviet Union, even though they employ ex-Soviet military technicians as advisors to help them fight their former Afghan allies, because these former allies just don't seem to get it. They seem to think that foreign invasion is still aggression no matter who does it, that they have the right to resist regardless. They don't understand that the USA is the good guys, and good guys are allowed to do what bad guys can't. That their interventions are by definition humanitarian, because they're made by us for all the right reasons and all the best intentions, and to resist makes the resistance to bad guys as well. It's not what crime is done, but who does it to whom, that seems the essence of the Washington practice, with the rule of law so much emperor's clothing, from its own state and local jail statistics to the imposition of imperial law and order upon other jurisdictions and peoples. But, Azov, aren't there atrocities and crimes committed out there, and doesn't something need to be done about them? If you see a child being molested by some creep, are you just going to wait for bystanders to do something, or do something yourself? Someone's got to be the cop on the street. The flaw in that analogy is that in practice the U.S. picks and chooses which molester to attack, making sure A, it's not a molester in their friends and family network, and B, that they can do so without suffering too much in retaliation. The molester must be someone relatively smaller and weaker whose resistance can be easily overcome. The safeguarding of law and order in the streets is secondary to the expedient establishment of political control over them. And again, the lessons of Vietnam were that sometimes you have to destroy every home in the village to save its children from molesters because, well, the damn gooks all look alike. Who can this be? Hello, who's this? Roberto da Buisson, late head of the paramilitary death squads of El Salvador, the man who masterminded the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero. What? Those are just communist allegations without witnesses? Because they all disappeared? Anyway, what can I do for you? To remind my viewers that it was a lucky thing for you that the U.S. was too honest in the old days to apply all this humanitarian rule of law shit in its own backyard. Well, don't worry, that sure wasn't likely. The only chance for a humanitarian intervention in El Salvador in the 1980s would have been a Soviet-Cuban invasion to bomb your army into submission, then occupy you with boots on the ground and impose democracy from above. Big Daddy America wouldn't let that happen. As long as you're on the right side of history, like Hillary Clinton says, whether it's you or the Kosovo Mafia or the My Lai boys of Pinkville, you can get away with murder.